This is part 11 in the series on how to live the victorious Christian life, and I want to talk to you today about how to sin less than you do. Would you like to sin less than you do? It occurs to me that there's two kind of people who wouldn't find this interesting. The first kind of person is the person who thinks that sin is not all that bad, and I want to say to you, sin is the stuff that messes up your life. Sin is the stuff that you come to regret. Sin is the stuff that in the long run, you come to regret doing. Hebrews 11:25 says, He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. The fleeting pleasures of sin, which tells us that if you want a fun weekend, sin it up. Sin it up, enjoy yourself if you want a fun weekend. But if you want a good life, if you want a long, rich, satisfying, no regret life, then we want to try to avoid sin as much as we can. So the first kind of person who doesn't find this interesting is the person who doesn't find sin all that bad. And the second kind of person who doesn't find this interesting is the person who thinks they can stop sinning simply by trying really hard. And the Bible teaches that we can't stop sinning by trying really hard. The Bible teaches that we are slaves to sin, and we simply cannot do it by trying really hard to be good. So how do we sin less than we do? Let me introduce this by misquoting a verse. I'm going to put it up on the screen and read it, and I want to ask you, how have I misquoted this verse? All right, 1 Corinthians 10:13, kind of a familiar verse. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, He will strengthen you so that you can endure it. You find it? Where did I misquote that verse? No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. So far so good. God is faithful. So far so good. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, He will also strengthen you so that you can endure it. Well, it's in that last little part. It doesn't say so that He will strengthen you. It says so that He will provide a way out so that you can endure it. One way to picture this, if you can imagine a road and there's a big rainstorm and big boulders have come down on the road and a bridge has been washed out and a part of the road has been washed down into a ravine and so on. And it's a very treacherous road. But before you ever get to that road, there's an exit. And if you'll take that exit, you can take a completely different road. And if you take that completely different road, you don't have to be a skilled driver. You don't have to drive around those boulders and across that now rickety bridge and be careful there where part of the road has gone down the ravine, because you find the way of escape. And here's the principle. If you can avoid the temptation, you can avoid the sin. If you can avoid the temptation, you can avoid the sin. Would you like to sin less than you do? If you'd like to sin less than you do, try to arrange your life where you simply are not tempted as much as you would otherwise be. I'd encourage you to follow what I could call the Billy Graham rule, the Billy Graham rule. And it essentially goes like this, and I'm actually going to quote Andy Stanley because he and a lot of other preachers, and myself included, have adopted this rule. And the rule simply goes like this. I don't go to lunch with a woman. I don't ride in a car with a woman. I don't counsel a woman alone. I am never alone with a woman for any reason. I don't talk with a woman about anything personal. And I've heard Andy Stanley talk about back in the day when he was a youth minister for his daddy's church in the downtown location, downtown Atlanta, and they were relocating to the north location, and a couple of times a week, if I remember the story right, he and his female secretary would both show up at the building in the downtown location, and they would get out of their cars from the same parking lot, and they would walk into the same building, and they'd do some work for a while, and then they would get out of their offices and go out to the same parking lot and get in two separate cars and drive across town, 30 minutes or an hour, depending on traffic across town, to go to the same building and to park in the same parking lot and to walk into the same building and to go to the same meeting, sit there for a while, and then come out and go to the same parking lot and sit in two separate cars and drive across town again 30 minutes or an hour. Why in the world he did this? And he says he did this for years. He did this because he said, I don't get in a car with a woman. I don't counsel a woman alone. I don't eat lunch with a woman. And if you live that way, it's pretty hard to have an affair. Affairs don't start in the bedroom. They start with a conversation that's a little bit too personal. They start with an opportunity to converse and so on. And if you simply try to avoid the temptation, you can avoid the sin. Let me ask you a question. True or false? True or false? Mature Christians sin as much as they want to. True or false, mature Christians sin as much as they want to. And I would say that is absolutely true. In fact, I would tell you in my case, and it's probably true as many of you, and that is I sin more than I want to. I sin more than I want to. And that is true for two reasons. For one thing, God is changing our heart where we don't want to sin, where we recognize sin is a stuff that'll mess up our life. And beyond that, we simply arrange our life where we're not tempted all that often. In fact, I would say people who don't live a victory in Jesus life are trying harder to live the Christian life than people who do live a victory in Jesus life. But because people who live a victory in Jesus life have arranged their life where they consistently find that way of escape. I love that poem about a man who walked down a road and he fell in a hole, and he said, "Oh man, I hate falling in this hole. This is awful." But he scratched and he clawed and he climbed and he made his way out of that hole, and he thought to himself, "Boy, I'm never going to fall in that hole again." And the next day he walked down the road and he fell in the hole again. And he said, "Oh, I hate this hole. I hate falling in this hole. This is a terrible hole. I don't like falling in this hole." And he made his way out and he said, I'm going to try really hard. I'm never going to fall into that hole again. And he walked down the street and he thought to himself, "Well, I'll just look into the hole." And he came over and he looked into the hole. Sure enough, he fell into the hole. And the next day he said to himself, "You know what? I'm going to walk down the other street." And he walked down the other side of the street, And but then he got to that hole again and he thought, "Well, I'm just going to take a little peek, just a little peek into that hole." And he walked over and took a little peek, and sure enough, he fell down in that hole. And the next day, he didn't fall in the hole. And the next day, and the next day, and the next day. And the truth is, it's been years and he'd never fallen in that hole again. And what was the secret? He walked down a different street. He walked down a different street. And if you will walk down a different street, if you can avoid the temptation, you can avoid the sin. You can't always avoid the temptation, but where you can avoid the temptation, you can avoid the sin. Let's imagine that you're trying to lose weight and you want to avoid the temptation of eating a big bowl of ice cream. I'll tell you how to do it. Just don't have any ice cream in your house, because it comes to 8 or 9 o'clock at night and you feel like having a big bowl of ice cream. You probably don't want it enough to run to Walmart. But if you just get rid of the ice cream, if you just don't have ice cream in your house, then you're not tempted to eat ice cream. Look at this passage, 2 Samuel 11:1. In the spring of the year, at the time when kings go off to war, what do kings do? They go off to war. And what did David do? David sent Joab. He sent Joab and he stayed home. And if you know the rest of the story, he had an adulterous relationship with Bathsheba. He ended up killing her husband and so on. And it caused him great misery because he didn't avoid the temptation. If he had simply done what kings are supposed to do, go off to war, then he would have avoided the temptation and he would have avoided the sin. The Bible says flee sexual immorality. It doesn't say try really hard not to sin. It says flee from sexual immorality. 1 Timothy 6:11. But you, men of God, flee from all this and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. You see also in this passage the principle of replacing, overcoming evil with good, but that's another topic for another day. 2 Timothy 2:22, flee the evil desires of youth and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, along with those who call on the Lord out of a pure heart. Now, if you'd like to read more about this, I encourage you to take the YouVersion app and do a search for temptation. And I'll bet you nearly every plan in this app that deals with temptation is going to deal with this idea of the way of escape. If you can avoid the temptation, you can avoid the sin. And I would encourage you to get another app, and that is the Bible Memory app, and enter this verse, 1 Corinthians 10:13, into the app and begin to memorize and meditate on that verse. And think about how you can find the way of escape. If you're tempted to sin in a particular way, how you can find the way of escape. If you're a Bible study leader, I would invite you to check out my lessons. Good questions, have groups talking. And by the way, on my website, you can find a list of all of the videos that I've done in this series under the tab Video Training at the very bottom, Victory in Jesus. You can find all these videos, and you might want to go back through those. And if you live anywhere near me, I live in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and pastor a church about 45 minutes north of town, Salem Baptist Church. And if you're not going to church anywhere, I would love to have you join us as we explore together how we can live the victorious Christian life.